The moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the stage of the 2026 Sundance Film Festival, the air seemed to change. Cameras clicked, flashes flickered, and the audience, filled with Hollywood royalty, indie auteurs, and A-list celebrities, shifted in their seats. She was poised, elegant, and utterly composed. But then something happened that no one anticipated. Silence. Dead silence. Not a clap, not a murmur of polite applause. Nothing. The kind of silence that hangs heavy, suffocates, and screams louder than a standing ovation ever could. And in that instant, everyone in the room felt it. The shock, the tension, and the unspoken question that none of the stars dared to voice. Why? But before we continue, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Was it a deliberate snub? A miscalculation? Or something far more personal, hidden beneath the veneer of Hollywood politeness? As Meghan raised the microphone, confident and smiling, the crowd looked past her. Eyes darted, phones clicked, but hands stayed firmly on laps. The silence was deafening, and it didn't just rattle Meghan. It rattled the room, the organizers, the PR teams, and every camera operator who suddenly realized they were witnessing something unusual. Something historic, something viral before it even hit social media. Moments like these are what Sundance is supposed to be about. Unexpected brilliance, groundbreaking performances, and the quiet magic of cinema. But this was different. The festival, known for its appreciation of artistry, for its embrace of both Hollywood icons and indie upstarts, had become the backdrop for a public display that no one would forget. A room full of stars had collectively decided silence. And silence in this context wasn't empty. It was loud. It was pointed. It was almost accusatory. For weeks leading up to Sundance, Meghan's attendance had been the talk of Hollywood. Social media buzzed with speculation about what she would say, who she would meet, and how she would navigate the delicate dance of celebrity and royalty. Insider whispers promised a speech that would inspire, challenge, and perhaps even shock the audience. Everyone expected brilliance, but no one expected this level of rejection. And it didn't take long for the whispers to spread. By the time the footage hit the internet, clips of her poised stance and the audience's blank faces were trending. Memes began circulating within hours, dissecting every gesture, every pause, every glance. Silent treatment at Sundance became a headline overnight. But the story goes much deeper than just a lack of applause, because when you peel back the layers, when you step behind the velvet ropes and past the PR gloss, a web of subtle tensions, hidden rivalries, and unspoken grudges emerges. There were whispers of prearranged seating plans meant to isolate her, private communications between festival organizers and industry executives, and perhaps even messages sent to certain guests instructing them how to react. Was it coordinated? Possibly. Was it personal? Absolutely. And yet, Meghan's composure never wavered publicly. She smiled, she gestured, she delivered her lines with practiced elegance. But if you looked closely, if you studied the micro-expressions caught on the cameras, the flicker of a raised brow, a subtle shift of weight, a tightening around the eyes, you could see the tension underneath. A storm was brewing, and the room was the perfect stage. A stage where Hollywood glamour collided with real human emotions: pride, fear, resentment, and ambition. The first few sentences of her speech passed without reaction. She spoke about creativity, storytelling, and the importance of diverse voices in film. These are not controversial topics. And yet, the silence persisted. Not a single hand moved to clap. Not a single laugh punctuated a light-hearted anecdote. Instead, the room hummed with an awkward energy, a mix of polite indifference and something sharper, something colder. And the silence wasn't uniform. It was layered. Some people stared intently at her, their expressions unreadable, while others turned away, engaged in quiet conversations, or pretended to check their phones. It was a scene straight out of a psychological drama, a room full of the powerful unsure how to react, watching a single person hold her ground amidst their collective coldness. By the time she reached the midpoint of her speech, a ripple of tension became palpable. A few photographers glanced at each other, unsure if they should intervene, capture the awkwardness, or ignore it altogether. PR agents whispered urgently into earpieces, sending frantic messages to social media teams, wondering how to spin this moment. And while Meghan maintained her outward calm, internally she was navigating a labyrinth of mixed signals. Every pause, every carefully chosen word, every measured gesture was being scrutinized. This wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a test. A public, silent judgment that would ripple across Hollywood and social media alike. And what of the audience? They were as diverse as Sundance gets, directors known for independent masterpieces, actors whose careers have spanned decades, festival patrons whose names alone can open doors. Yet, when Meghan spoke, they collectively opted for silence. Not awkward silence, not uncertain silence. This was deliberate, unmistakable. Every second she held the microphone, every word she spoke was met with the same steady quiet. And the effect on her, though subtle, was undeniable. Her smile flickered once, just barely, a hint of awareness that she felt the weight of the room. The confidence remained, yes, but it was layered now with something more complex: scrutiny, challenge, and an unspoken confrontation with the very culture she had entered. What happened next only intensified the spectacle. As she moved toward the conclusion of her speech, cameras began catching reactions from unexpected places, whispered side conversations, subtle smirks, and the occasional pointed glance exchanged between guests. It was as if a silent narrative was unfolding in the audience, running parallel to Meghan's words. Social media commentators, eager for drama, labeled it immediately the silent snub of Sundance. Meghan ignored by Hollywood elite. Red carpet silence as royal speaks. The memes, tweets, and commentary flowed in real time, amplifying a moment that mere hours before would have been confined to a festival theater. But here's the key. This wasn't just a social media moment. The silence at Sundance 2026 was a symptom of larger, deeper dynamics. It revealed fractures within Hollywood's power structures, tensions between public persona and private opinions, and a complex interplay of personal history and professional rivalry. Some insiders suggested that certain guests held grudges over past media interactions. Others hinted at ongoing political maneuverings, and a few even whispered that it was related to Meghan's continued involvement in global advocacy, work that, while noble, had rubbed some Hollywood executives the wrong way. And then, just as she was finishing, the microphone captured it. A barely audible shuffle, a nervous laugh, a whispered comment. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The audience, which had remained largely passive until now, reacted in a way that was both telling and provocative. The moment crystallized the tension, froze the atmosphere, and sent a shiver through everyone present. Those watching via live streams or security feeds would later describe it as surreal, almost cinematic, a real-life drama unfolding faster than anyone could have scripted. What made this even more compelling is that the story didn't end with the speech. In fact, it was only beginning. Backstage, PR teams scrambled. Celebrity agents huddled in corners, phones in hand, sending urgent messages to clients. Festival organizers debated whether to release footage or suppress it, and somewhere in a private screening room, certain guests watched the recorded moments again and again, trying to decode the meaning behind the silence. Was it personal, professional, political? Perhaps all three. This is where things take a turn that most viewers never saw coming. Because while the cameras caught Meghan on stage and the audience in silence, they didn't capture the off-camera exchanges, the subtle gestures, the whispered instructions, the private glances that revealed alliances and rivalries forming in real time. The real story of Sundance 2026 wasn't just that the audience ignored Meghan, it was why they ignored her, and who was behind it. And that, my friends, is where the intrigue begins. So, why does this matter now? Why are we revisiting this moment months later, dissecting the silence frame by frame, replaying every glance and gesture? Because moments like these have consequences. Careers are influenced, reputations are shaped, and Hollywood's public narrative is often controlled by a combination of power, perception, and subtle orchestration. What happened at Sundance 2026 didn't just affect Meghan in that room. It rippled outward, affecting projects, relationships, and the way the entertainment world interprets celebrity influence. And just when you think the story has reached its peak, the footage of that night resurfaces online, edited, analyzed, and debated. People notice things they hadn't seen before. A sidelong glance between two executives, a barely perceptible shake of the head, a subtle sigh. Each detail becomes a piece of a puzzle, and suddenly, the silence takes on new meaning. Was it disdain, fear, strategy, or something far more complicated? The streets of Park City, Utah were buzzing with a peculiar energy that year. It wasn't just the snow glinting under the January sun, or the colorful banners announcing Sundance 2026. It was the anticipation, the palpable tension in the air, a feeling that something unusual was about to unfold. Every winter, this small mountain town transformed into a cinematic kingdom, drawing actors, directors, producers, and influencers from every corner of the globe. But this year, the whispers were different. The rumors weren't just about the films or the exclusive premieres. They were about her, Meghan Markle, and the storm that seemed to follow her wherever she went. As the festival opened, luxury SUVs pulled up to the red carpet, glistening under the icy sun. Paparazzi cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing every detail: the glimmer of designer gowns, the perfectly tailored tuxedos, the sparkling smiles. But among all the familiar faces, one name dominated conversations backstage: Meghan Markle. Some whispered admiration, others whispered outright fear. Fear? Yes. Fear of disruption, of attention, of exposure. After all, Meghan was not just any celebrity. She was a figure who straddled two worlds, royalty and Hollywood, and that intersection had always been precarious. The industry insiders who had gathered for Sundance 2026 weren't just here for films. They were here for influence. Every handshake, every whispered conversation in the VIP lounges, every glance across the lobby was a currency. And now, Meghan's presence was about to challenge the established order. Some saw it as an opportunity, a chance to align themselves with someone whose name alone could generate headlines. Others saw it as a threat, a destabilizing element that could shift narratives, draw attention, and, perhaps unintentionally, expose old grudges. By mid-morning, the festival halls were alive with movement. Directors hurried past in thick coats clutching scripts and storyboards. Actors rehearsed lines under soft, diffuse lighting. Publicists coordinated schedules with military precision, checking which celebrity would appear where and when. And then, at the heart of it all, Meghan's team arrived. The buzz reached a fever pitch. Cameras swiveled, flashes erupted, and social media feeds began filling with pre-event speculation. Meghan at Sundance, what will she say? Royalty meets indie film. Can she deliver? Audience reaction, anticipated or ignored. Backstage, preparations were meticulous. Every detail of Meghan's speech had been rehearsed, every word weighed, every gesture timed to perfection. But alongside the choreography, there was a subtle undercurrent of uncertainty. Who would be in the audience? Which executives had been seated near the stage? And most importantly, how would the crowd react to someone whose very presence blurred the line between royalty, celebrity, and Hollywood power? The answers to these questions were unknown, and in that uncertainty, tension built. The red carpet itself became a theater of expectation. Guests arrived in pairs, clusters, and solo, each movement observed and interpreted. Gossip flowed like wine as agents whispered about seating arrangements, former feuds, and subtle alliances. One producer, speaking off the record, described the mood. It was like watching a chessboard being set up before the first move. Everyone was positioning themselves, some for advantage, some for observation, and some simply to avoid being caught on the wrong side of history. Meghan's arrival was scheduled for mid-afternoon. Leading up to it, the festival seemed to pulse in rhythm with speculation. In lounges, filmmakers debated her speech topics, her potential impact, her perceived motives. Critics analyzed past events from charity appearances to high-profile interviews, dissecting patterns, tone, and style. And as the audience moved toward the theater where she would speak, a strange dichotomy emerged. Excitement intertwined with tension, admiration shadowed by skepticism. It was as though the collective consciousness of Sundance had split in two, half eager to witness her brilliance, half bracing for disruption. Security protocols were tighter than usual that year. While Sundance has always prioritized the safety of its guests, Meghan's presence added an extra layer of scrutiny. Private entrances were mapped, earpieces synced, and coordination with local law enforcement was meticulous. But beneath all the logistical planning, there was a silent understanding among organizers. This was more than a festival appearance. This was a performance under the microscope of public opinion, social media judgment, and industry scrutiny. The media coverage leading up to the event was relentless. Headlines alternated between praise and critique, speculating on everything from fashion choices to potential networking outcomes. A feature in a prominent trade magazine described her as a figure who can dominate a room without uttering a word, while another piece hinted at tensions brewing behind the scenes, quoting an anonymous guest. It's not about her work, it's about her presence. And presence in this room makes some people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, social media chatter amplified every whisper. Twitter threads dissected outfit choices and past interviews. Instagram posts captured fleeting moments of arrival. TikTok users speculated about potential reactions, posting side-by-side clips of past speeches and rumored interactions with Hollywood elites. The anticipation became a feedback loop, speculation feeding coverage, coverage feeding anticipation, anticipation amplifying scrutiny. By the time the theater doors opened, the festival had reached a fever pitch. Guests found their seats, whispered greetings exchanged, phones subtly recording, and eyes occasionally flicking toward the stage. Organizers had arranged seating strategically, placing industry heavyweights at the front, influencers slightly off-center, and media personnel in positions to capture every angle. The tension was nearly tangible. And then, a hush fell over the room. It was in this charged atmosphere that Meghan's arrival became a defining moment. She walked in, composed, smiling, every gesture deliberate yet effortless. Cameras focused, flashes lit up the room, and for a heartbeat, the audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. This was more than an introduction, it was a test. And as she moved toward the podium, there was a subtle acknowledgement among guests that what followed would be significant. But before she spoke a word, the audience's reactions, or lack thereof, began to hint at something extraordinary. A few polite smiles, nods, even small murmurs of recognition were visible. Yet the expected applause, the warmth, the affirmation that often accompanies a high-profile entrance, was absent. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't hesitant. It was deliberate. The silence, thick and layered, stretched across the room like a tangible presence. And in that moment, the stage became more than a platform. It became a spotlight not only on her words, but on the subtle power dynamics at play. What made this so captivating wasn't just the silence itself, but what it implied. It suggested histories, rivalries, and judgments carried silently among the audience. It suggested that while she had prepared meticulously, the crowd had also come with unspoken intentions, agendas, and emotions. The festival, usually a celebration of artistry and collaboration, had become a stage for unvoiced confrontations and carefully calculated reactions. And as Meghan adjusted the microphone, ready to deliver her speech, the collective awareness in the room shifted. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. PR teams watched closely, preparing for anything that might go viral. Influencers whispered to each other, eager to post the first reactions online. And somewhere in the back of the theater, a handful of guests shared knowing glances, the kind that suggested insider knowledge of past events, relationships, and subtle tensions waiting to surface. This was more than a speech. It was the opening move in a silent chess match between a high-profile figure navigating the intersection of royalty and Hollywood and an audience whose silence spoke volumes. The anticipation, the strategic positioning, the whispered expectations, all of it culminated in a moment charged with potential and yet teetering on the edge of chaos. And just as she opened her mouth to begin, a subtle stir in the room caught the corner of her eye. Heads turned slightly, hands twitched, some guests leaned in, others subtly withdrew. Every movement was a clue, a hint of alliances, rivalries, and unspoken judgments. The room, silent yet expressive, became a mirror reflecting the complex dance of perception, power, and presence. Little did anyone in that theater know, the reactions they were about to witness, the subtle tensions and deliberate silences, would not only dominate headlines, but would spark months of speculation, analysis, and controversy. Sundance 2026 had promised cinematic innovation and artistic brilliance, but it delivered something far more unpredictable. A real-life drama playing out in the very heart of Hollywood's elite. When Meghan Markle finally arrived at the 2026 Sundance Film Festival, it wasn't just an entrance. It was a calculated spectacle, a choreography of optics, presence, and anticipation. She stepped out of the black luxury SUV, her coat brushing the icy Utah air, heels clicking with precision on the marble steps. Cameras swiveled in unison, flashes punctuated the winter light, and the crowd, already charged with whispers and speculation, shifted collectively. For a split second, the world seemed to pause, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for her next move. But the pause wasn't just a product of glamour or celebrity. No, there was something different this time. The energy was electric, but not purely admiring. There was tension, curiosity, and, if you could read it just right, a faint undercurrent of resistance. Industry insiders who had attended Sundance for decades whispered to each other in quiet corners. Something about her presence changes the room. It's magnetic. But it's also unsettling. They didn't know why exactly, but the feeling was undeniable. She walked with the poise of someone trained for scrutiny, every step measured. Every glance intentional, every smile strategically placed to convey warmth without vulnerability. But while she presented herself as calm and confident, the audience was already reading the room in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Heads turned, eyes darted. Some guests straightened in their chairs. Others adjusted their seats slightly, careful not to appear too engaged or too disinterested. The delicate art of silence had begun even before she reached the stage. The photographers worked frantically to capture every angle, every fleeting micro-expression. They snapped pictures of the subtle tension in Meghan's jaw, the sparkle of her eyes under the camera lights, the graceful sway of her gown. Editors back in New York, Los Angeles, and London would later pore over these shots, dissecting them frame by frame, speculating on what her stance revealed about her confidence, her anxiety, and her anticipation of the audience reaction. For them, this wasn't just red carpet coverage. It was an early indicator of a narrative that would dominate headlines within hours. Meanwhile, festival organizers were a flurry of controlled panic and precise coordination. They had meticulously designed seating arrangements, strategic placements for press and VIP guests, and a contingency plan for social media responses. Every detail mattered. And yet, despite all preparation, there was a wild card in the room. An unpredictable element that no seating chart, no PR strategy could control. Human reaction. As Meghan moved toward the entrance of the theater, subtle glances were exchanged between attendees. Some smiled politely, nodding in recognition of her presence. Others whispered quietly, casting furtive looks toward their companions. And then there were those who did nothing. Not a gesture, not a nod. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Their silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. A quiet statement that, even in a room designed to celebrate art and collaboration, personal judgments and rivalries could speak louder than applause. It's important to understand that this silence wasn't uniform. It had layers. There were those who genuinely respected her, admired her poise, or were intrigued by her ability to straddle worlds so disparate, royalty and Hollywood. There were others who were skeptical, wary, or perhaps even resentful of her influence, her name recognition, or the media attention she invariably attracted. And then there were those who simply saw an opportunity to observe, to analyze, and to use this moment to position themselves within the festival's complex social hierarchy. From the outside, it appeared as a glamorous entrance, but the truth was far more nuanced. Every movement she made, every subtle turn of her head, was being read and interpreted. A nod from Meghan was seen as confidence. A pause was read as hesitation. A smile? Well, that was dissected as both charm and calculation. And this intricate dance of perception created a theater within a theater, a silent dialogue between Meghan and the audience, an unspoken negotiation of attention, approval, and influence. Backstage, the energy was just as frenetic. Meghan's team moved with precision, guiding her through security checks, media interactions, and last-minute adjustments. Publicists coordinated with press, confirming camera angles and questions. Social media teams monitored live feeds, analyzing early reactions, and preparing posts to shape narrative in real time. The complexity of these operations is often underestimated by the public. For every poised figure on the red carpet, there is a team orchestrating a symphony of optics, ensuring every moment aligns with strategy and messaging. And yet, even with such preparation, there remained one variable beyond control: the collective mood of the audience she was about to face. Inside the theater, the atmosphere was charged. Guests whispered among themselves, speculating on what to expect, exchanging insights and subtly aligning in micro-clusters of influence. Directors, producers, and high-profile actors leaned into conversations that were equal parts curiosity and calculation. Some focused on the films, others on the spectacle. And all of them were keenly aware that Meghan's appearance wasn't just another celebrity moment. It was a test, a potential disruptor of the carefully curated social order of Sundance. Yeah. As she approached the stage, security agents flanked her subtly, ensuring the flow of movement remained unobstructed. Cameras tracked her every step. Editors and producers mentally checked shots, angles, and compositions. Social media specialists prepared to amplify every detail, whether it was a smile, a gesture, or even a pause. The stakes were high. For Meghan, it was a professional appearance with personal weight. For the audience, it was a test of composure, attention, and perception. For the media, it was content gold waiting to be mined. And then she stepped onto the stage. There was a collective inhale. Some viewers on social media watching live streams described the sensation as surreal, as if the entire festival held its breath. Yet the reaction, or lack thereof, was telling. A few polite nods, small smiles, and subtle acknowledgments were visible. But the anticipated applause, the kind that often greets high-profile figures at Sundance, was missing. Not hesitant, not awkward, not delayed, it simply wasn't there. The absence was conspicuous, striking, and immediately noticeable to anyone paying attention. For Meghan, the moment was a test. She had rehearsed her opening words countless times, refined her gestures, and carefully planned the rhythm of her speech. Yet the audience's deliberate silence added a variable that no preparation could mitigate. She smiled, adjusted her posture, and began to speak, but the weight of scrutiny was unmistakable. Every syllable, every pause, every gesture would now be measured not only for content, but for resilience, poise, and impact in the face of an audience that on some level had already passed judgment. From the first words, subtle cues in the audience's behavior set the tone. Some guests shifted in their seats, leaning slightly toward companions to whisper observations. Others stared blankly, hands folded, eyes scanning. Cameras captured it all. But the true story was in the nuance. The micro-reactions, the barely perceptible shifts in energy, the flickers of tension that told a story far richer than words ever could. This wasn't just a speech. It was a public psychological experiment, an unspoken dialogue between a figure of prominence and a room trained to observe, judge, and react. And backstage, the tension was mirrored. Publicists whispered updates, social media teams scrambled to interpret early reactions, and organizers adjusted logistics on the fly. The festival's meticulously constructed veneer of civility and celebration was cracking, revealing the raw human undercurrents of judgment, rivalry, and social hierarchy. By the time Meghan reached the podium, the room was primed. Every guest, consciously or subconsciously, was participating in a silent choreography. Gestures calibrated, eyes adjusted, expressions controlled. The absence of applause became a statement in itself, a quiet, deliberate signal carrying meaning that would be dissected, debated, and speculated about for weeks to come. And then, she opened her mouth to speak. The silence lingered. It stretched. It pressed down on the room like a physical weight. Every word she uttered, every carefully crafted sentence, met the same steady, deliberate quiet. This was no ordinary audience reaction. This was a test of influence, perception, and endurance, a subtle layered statement that challenged not only Meghan's speech, but her very presence in that room. As the opening lines passed, a ripple of subtle movement moved through the audience. A few heads tilted, a hand adjusted in a pocket, a slight cough here and there. But no one applauded. No one cheered. No one broke the tension. And in that moment, Meghan's speech transformed from a planned presentation into a public trial of perception, influence, and social dynamics. The audience wasn't just hearing her words, they were measuring her, judging her, weighing her against expectations, rumors, and the invisible rules of this elite space. The result? A moment that would be replayed, dissected, and analyzed far beyond the walls of the theater. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a presence, a force, a narrative in itself. And it was only the beginning of a series of events that would dominate headlines, social media threads, and private discussions for weeks, months, and perhaps even years to come. Little did Meghan know, the reception she had just experienced, quiet, calculated, and layered, was merely the opening act of a drama that was far from over. The reactions, the whispers, and the subtle maneuvers of those around her were all pieces of a puzzle that no one had yet fully understood. And as she continued her journey through Sundance 2206, every step, every word, every gesture would be scrutinized, recorded, and interpreted in ways she could scarcely imagine. The moment Meghan Markle gripped the microphone, a hush settled over the theater like a physical weight. The room, already tense from her arrival and reception, seemed to lean forward collectively, anticipating something remarkable. Or perhaps something controversial. But what no one expected was the silence. Not hesitant, not polite, not tentative, dead, deliberate silence. She opened her speech with carefully rehearsed words, designed to inspire, to connect, to leave an impression. She spoke of storytelling, the power of cinema, and the responsibility of artists to amplify voices often unheard. Her cadence was measured, her voice clear, her gestures purposeful. Yet the room remained unyielding. She had mastered public appearances, navigated scrutiny, and handled media storms. But this cold, unwavering attention, devoid of any visible support, was something else entirely. What made the silence even more potent was the audience's composition. The theater was filled with industry giants, directors whose names commanded respect, actors whose performances had defined decades, producers whose decisions could make or break careers. Each had attended Sundance many times, accustomed to celebrating their peers, applauding achievements, and reacting in ways that seemed almost instinctual. And yet, faced with Meghan, the audience collectively chose restraint, and in that restraint, they spoke volumes. Some attendees whispered quietly, leaning toward companions, their eyes flicking toward the stage, barely audible, "Do we applaud? Do we wait? What's the protocol?" These whispers were not merely courteous hesitations, they were subtle negotiations of social positioning. In a room so carefully curated, where every reaction could signal allegiance, disdain, or strategic indifference, even the smallest gesture mattered. The silence, then, was not just an absence, it was deliberate, layered, and fraught with meaning. Meghan's first anecdote, a story about an independent filmmaker breaking barriers in their community, was delivered with warmth and passion. Her eyes scanned the audience, and for a moment there seemed to be a flicker of connection. A few heads tilted, a subtle smile here and there, but applause? Still absent, laughter at her light-hearted jokes? Non-existent. The audience was present, yet emotionally detached, a paradox that would unnerve even the most seasoned public speaker. What was happening in the room was more than passive observation. It was an unspoken evaluation, a collective weighing of her influence, her presence, and her ability to navigate this space where Hollywood and royalty intersected. Every gesture she made, every inflection in her voice, was being recorded, both literally and metaphorically. Photographers snapped incessantly, social media feeds streamed live, and even the casual observer could sense that they were witnessing something unprecedented. And then, subtle reactions began to ripple through the audience. A cough here, a shift of weight there, a slight exchange of glances between two industry veterans. None of it overt, none of it coordinated. Or was it? That's what made the moment so fascinating. Some movements were natural, almost reflexive. Others seemed intentional, like silent signals of agreement or dissent. The layers of meaning were complex, nearly impossible to decipher from the stage alone. And yet, Meghan continued, composed and unwavering, aware of the gravity of every word, every pause, every expression. She moved into the heart of her speech, discussing the importance of diversity in storytelling and the responsibility of those with influence to create inclusive narratives. She referenced past experiences, challenges faced by marginalized filmmakers, and the subtle biases embedded in the industry. The content was compelling, resonant, and well-intentioned, and yet the room's silence persisted. It wasn't ignorance, nor was it inattentiveness. It was deliberate restraint, a collective message that, whether consciously or unconsciously, communicated skepticism, evaluation, and subtle challenge. Observers later noted the tension in Meghan's posture. While her outward demeanor remained polished and professional, the micro-expressions captured on film revealed flashes of awareness. A brief tightening around the jaw, a subtle raising of the eyebrows, a micro shift in stance. Nothing overt, nothing breaking the flow of her speech, but enough for those trained in reading human behavior to notice that she was navigating a complex social dynamic in real time. And yet, in true form, Meghan adapted. Her tone softened, her gestures expanded, and she used humor, strategically self-deprecating jokes, gentle observations, and light anecdotes designed to humanize her to bridge the growing chasm of detachment in the audience. It was a masterclass in public speaking under pressure, a display of resilience, and a demonstration of emotional intelligence that few could fully appreciate in a moment. But the audience's reactions, or the lack thereof, continued to tell a parallel story. A few front-row guests whispered to one another, small smirks briefly appearing before being replaced with neutral expressions. Some shifted in their seats, almost imperceptibly, signaling either curiosity and patience or subtle judgment. Cameras captured it all, but the footage alone could not convey the layered complexity of social dynamics unfolding in real time. For those watching later, frame by frame, these moments would become a focal point of analysis, sparking endless debates online. Were they mocking, dismissing, or simply disengaged? And then came the moment that would later become the centerpiece of viral clips. Meghan shared a story of collaboration between filmmakers from vastly different backgrounds, highlighting the beauty that emerges when voices converge across boundaries. The story was poignant, heartfelt, and inspiring. One might have expected applause, perhaps even a few nods or murmurs of appreciation. But nothing. The room remained still. The silence was complete, almost reverent, but not in a celebratory way. It was the kind of silence that communicates assessment, judgment, and scrutiny all at once. This silence was not just external, it had internal consequences as well. Meghan's presence in that room was a psychological probe testing the audience's willingness to respond, react, and engage. Each unacknowledged joke, each unrecognized anecdote compounded the tension. The absence of feedback forced the speaker to rely solely on internal composure, emotional resilience, and the carefully honed ability to project confidence under pressure. And Meghan, seasoned by years of public scrutiny, navigated this with the poise and determination that had become her hallmark. Yet there were subtle signs of cracks in the room's composure. A whisper here, a sideways glance there, slight shifts in body language, imperceptible to most but glaring to trained observers. Every reaction, or non-reaction, became a thread in a tapestry of meaning, each one weaving a story of power, perception, and social hierarchy. The audience wasn't simply listening. They were evaluating, calculating, and reacting in ways that extended far beyond the words being spoken. Even the media, often quick to cheer or criticize, were caught in a web of indecision. Some editors furiously typed captions, others debated whether to focus on content or context. Social media teams prepared posts, unsure how the public would interpret this unprecedented display of silent scrutiny. And all the while, Meghan pressed on, aware that her every movement was magnified, analyzed, and potentially weaponized in the court of public opinion. And just as she approached the final third of her speech, a ripple of subtle motion moved through the room. Someone shifted in the front row. A hand touched a chin, a whispered comment exchanged between two high-profile guests. It was almost imperceptible, yet in that room, under that level of scrutiny, it was seismic. Cameras caught glimpses, but the story wasn't in the footage. It was in the subtleties of human behavior. The audience's silence had transformed from a simple non-response into an active, layered communication, sending signals, making judgments, and influencing perceptions in real time. By the end of her opening remarks, the stage was set. The audience's silence, deliberate and multi-layered, had created a narrative parallel to her speech. The words she spoke were important, yes, but so too were the unspoken judgments, subtle gestures, and withheld reactions. The theater had become a complex arena where social dynamics, personal agendas, and professional evaluations collided. And Meghan was both the center of attention and a participant in a high-stakes social experiment she hadn't signed up to conduct it. And just when it seemed as though the tension could not be further ratcheted, someone in the audience, a well-known producer seated near the front, shifted in a way that would be captured on multiple cameras. A faint smile appeared, just barely visible. Heads turned slightly, eyes flicked toward the stage. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. Yet for those watching later, frame by frame, this micro-moment would be dissected, analyzed, and debated endlessly. A single gesture became a focal point in a narrative of silent judgment, subtle alliances, and unspoken power plays. The stage was set for what was about to come. The audience's silence was no longer passive. It had become active, layered, and charged with meaning. And Meghan, ever composed, would continue speaking, navigating the delicate balance of influence, perception, and public scrutiny in a room where every word, pause, and gesture mattered. The theater at Sundance 2026 had already entered a strange, almost surreal state. Meghan Markle had been speaking for several minutes, her voice steady, her gestures confident, her words carefully measured. Yet, the audience remained unmoved. The silence was no longer just a reaction. It had become a force in itself, spreading like an invisible wave throughout the room, touching every guest in different ways. Some seemed uneasy, unsure how to respond. Others remained stoically neutral, deliberately withholding any signs of approval. And then there were those who seemed almost thrilled by the quiet, as if the absence of applause had granted them an unspoken power. Observers later described it as a collective decision, a social experiment of sorts. The silence wasn't uniform, it had texture. A few polite nods dotted the audience, small acknowledgments here and there, but they were swallowed almost immediately by the overarching stillness. Some guests whispered to each other, low voices drifting across the theater filled with speculation, judgment, and quiet commentary. "Do we clap now?" one whispered. "I think we wait," replied another. And in that hesitation, the tension grew, stretching the silence to its breaking point. From the stage, Meghan could feel it, the weight of every unspoken reaction. Micro-expressions flashed across faces in seconds, a faint smile that didn't reach the eyes, a subtle frown disguised as concentration, a sideways glance that hinted at assessment. Each gesture, each blink, Each twitch of a hand became amplified, magnified by her heightened awareness of the room's energy. The silence paradoxically spoke louder than any cheer ever could. It communicated scrutiny, judgment, and an almost theatrical sense of control from the audience. It was at this point that the subtle cracks in the audience began to show. Some guests fidgeted in their seats, shifting weight from one foot to the other, adjusting posture, or leaning slightly toward their neighbors. A hand to a chin, a raised eyebrow, a whispered comment, all minor actions, but in the charged atmosphere of that theater, they became signs of unspoken commentary. Observers watching the footage later noted how these tiny movements created a narrative entirely separate from Meghan's words, a story of power, hierarchy, and calculated detachment. For those in the front rows, directors, producers, festival sponsors, the silence wasn't just a lack of acknowledgement, it was an opportunity to observe, to evaluate, to influence. Every gesture from Meghan was measured, every word weighed, and every pause considered. The audience's stillness became a mirror reflecting their own status, biases, and social positioning. The longer she spoke without response, the more they watched, the more they analyzed, and the more the silence itself became performative. A statement in its own right. Backstage, the tension mirrored what was happening on stage. PR teams exchanged worried glances, whispers passed between organizers, and social media teams monitored live streams, ready to respond to any ripple of reaction. Every moment of stillness on camera was scrutinized. "Are they ignoring her?" one agent asked. "Do we cut this feed? Should we highlight her confidence instead?" Another replied. The strategies were endless, but the challenge remained, how do you control perception when the audience itself has become a statement? And then, subtle shifts began in the audience dynamics. While the majority remained silent, small clusters started to form in whispered conversation. Guests leaned toward one another, voices low but audible to those paying attention. Analysts would later describe these murmurs as a mix of curiosity and strategy. Evaluations of Meghan's poise, assessments of the speech content, and speculative judgments about her influence and intentions. The room, though outwardly static, was alive with hidden dialogue, an undercurrent of commentary that no camera could fully capture. Social media coverage, meanwhile, began to amplify the tension in real time. Clips captured on attendees' phones were uploaded almost instantly, highlighting the silence, the blank faces, the subtle side glances. Platforms exploded with commentary. Meghan ignored at Sundance? The silent snub of 2026? Hollywood versus royalty, who wins? Analysts debated the meaning of the silence, dissecting micro-expressions and audience behavior in painstaking detail. In a matter of minutes, the moment became more than an event. It became a story, a narrative shaped as much by absence as by action. Inside the theater, the silence stretched further. Meghan, aware of the absence of applause, adapted her delivery. Her tone softened at moments of poignancy. She introduced light humor to bridge the emotional gap, and her gestures expanded to create a sense of connection. Yet the room remained unmoved in the ways that mattered most. There was no overt acknowledgement, no validation, no energy returned to the speaker. Every word she spoke now carried double weight. The content of the speech itself and the silent commentary of the audience. The psychological impact of this silence cannot be overstated. For a public figure like Meghan, accustomed to attention, praise, and scrutiny in equal measure, the absence of response creates a unique tension. It forces reflection, it demands resilience, and it subtly tests influence. Those in the audience understood this, consciously or unconsciously. Their collective inaction became a narrative tool, a demonstration of control, and a statement of position. It wasn't hostility, exactly. It wasn't disrespect. It was something far more calculated, a strategic layered response designed to communicate without speaking. And yet, cracks in the facade began to appear. Some guests, despite efforts to maintain composure, revealed subtle reactions, slight smirks, quiet glances, hesitant nods. Others shifted uncomfortably, adjusting posture, hands twitching slightly, eyes flicking toward the stage and then away. These micro-movements, seemingly minor, became magnified in the intense scrutiny of cameras and observers. Each action or inaction added to the complexity of the moment, creating a layered, multidimensional narrative that extended far beyond the words being spoken. Meghan's anecdotes, drawn from her experiences in advocacy work, highlighted collaboration, inclusivity, and resilience. She recounted stories of filmmakers overcoming adversity, communities uniting through art, and the transformative power of storytelling. Each example was compelling, emotional, and perfectly tailored to the Sundance audience. Yet, for all the content, the reaction, or deliberate lack thereof, transformed the speech into an arena of tension. Every story, every moment of insight was met with the same stillness, forcing both speaker and audience into a subtle, high-stakes negotiation of presence and power. This dynamic reached its peak during a particularly poignant segment. Meghan shared the story of a young filmmaker whose work had challenged stereotypes, faced systemic barriers, and ultimately achieved recognition on an international scale. Her voice softened, her gestures expanded to underscore key points, and her gaze swept across the audience. Yet the silence persisted. The audience remained frozen, as if collectively holding judgment, measuring the impact of the story not just by its content, but by the speaker's delivery, poise, and presence. At this point, the psychological tension was almost tangible. Meghan, ever composed, continued speaking, but every word now carried additional layers of meaning. The audience's silence had evolved into a complex force. It was observation, evaluation, and influence all at once. Subtle cues rippled through the theater, a whisper between two attendees, a hand adjusting in a pocket, a nod barely perceptible to the camera. Each micro-behavior became a statement, reinforcing the narrative that silence could indeed speak louder than words. Outside the theater, the buzz had begun. Social media feeds exploded with clips highlighting the silent reaction, hashtags trending within minutes, and online commentators dissecting every detail of the footage. Memes proliferated, jokes spread, and speculation ran wild. Some praised Meghan's composure, others criticized the audience, and a few questioned the authenticity of the event. The moment, once confined to a theater in Park City, had now expanded into a global discussion about influence, perception, and the power of collective judgment. And then, just as the speech approached its midpoint, a subtle gesture in the audience caught attention. A faint shift of a chair, a barely noticeable exchange of glances, a small but deliberate cough. These micro-movements, insignificant on their own, were magnified by the context, signaling hidden alliances, personal biases, and silent commentary. Observers would later analyze these moments frame by frame, debating intent, meaning, and implication. The silence had spread, evolved, and transformed into a layered narrative that was simultaneously observed, recorded, and interpreted. By the end of this segment, the stage was set. Meghan's speech had become more than words. It was a psychological tableau, a test of resilience, and a demonstration of influence in the face of deliberate indifference. The silence had spread through the theater, touching every corner, every guest, and every observer. It had become a character in its own right, shaping perception, dictating emotional beats, and forcing both speaker and audience into a delicate, unspoken dance of power, judgment, and presence. While Meghan Markle held the stage in an almost statuesque composure, a storm was quietly brewing backstage. To the casual observer, Sundance appeared as a harmonious celebration of cinema, complete with elegant red carpets, buzzing photographers, and the faint hum of anticipation. But behind the curtains, the scene was far from calm. Every whispered instruction, every urgent phone call, every subtle glance revealed a tension that had begun to reach a breaking point. Publicists hustled between rooms, earpieces glued in place, voices hushed yet urgent. One assistant was frantically coordinating camera feeds with live social media monitors, typing rapid-fire updates to online teams. "Clip 3 is trending already," she whispered to a colleague. "We need to prep commentary before the network picks it up." Another agent, seated with a clipboard overflowing with sticky notes, scanned the room like a hawk. "Make sure she's comfortable," the organizer murmured, eyes darting toward the stage. "But be ready, anything could happen." Security personnel moved with a quiet, taut precision. Their instructions were brief, curt, and deliberate. Monitor the exits, ensure no unplanned access, and maintain a buffer between the audience and the stage. For them, the situation was simple: prevent chaos. But the air of uncertainty created by the audience's deliberate silence added layers of complexity they hadn't anticipated. Even the best-laid protocols struggled to account for the intangible tension emanating from the theater. Whispers bounced between PR teams, festival organizers, and social media strategists. "Do we intervene?" one asked, glancing at the live feed showing Meghan's speech. "Do we amplify her confidence or cut for safety?" Another voice replied, calm yet concerned. "Every reaction counts now. This is bigger than any Sundance appearance we've ever managed." It was a rare moment where professional detachment collided with raw human uncertainty. The screens backstage told their own story. Multiple camera angles captured every subtle reaction in the audience: the sideways glance of a producer in the front row, the slight smirk barely concealed by a journalist typing on her laptop, the shifting weight of actors sitting near the aisle. Each movement, though imperceptible the most, was being monitored and analyzed in real time. Some in the control room leaned closer to the monitors, pointing to fleeting micro-expressions. "Look at that," one whispered, "front row, right-hand side. Did you see her reaction? That's telling." Meanwhile, Meghan's team communicated in hushed tones over headsets. "Keep her hydrated. Adjust lighting if needed. Cue the visuals. And make sure social media teams are ready for any spike." Their calm was strategic, a mask over the underlying anxiety that had crept into every corner of the backstage area. They knew the stakes weren't limited to this single speech. They were shaping public perception, viral moments, and long-term narratives in real time. The room's tension was further compounded by a small group of high-profile insiders gathered off to one side. Producers, former festival directors, and veteran agents exchanged subtle nods and half smiles. Their conversations were cryptic, filled with veiled references and insider knowledge. "Did you notice the whisper at row 4? One murmured. "That was deliberate. Watch how it spreads." Another responded, "It's strategic. They're controlling the optics, but no one knows who's orchestrating it behind the scenes." These exchanges hinted at a deeper layer of calculation. Behind the silence of the audience was an invisible choreography, an alignment of influence, reputation, and subtle rivalry. As Meghan continued speaking on stage, the backstage chaos intensified. Some staff began to take notes, documenting gestures, timing, and audience reactions for potential post-event analysis. Others adjusted lighting and sound, trying to ensure that every nuance of her speech was captured perfectly for archival footage. Social media monitors flickered with notifications. Tweets, Instagram stories, TikTok clips, and live reactions surged in real time. Each post added another layer of scrutiny, another angle from which the public could dissect the unfolding drama. A few agents paced quietly, phones pressed to ears, giving rapid instructions: amplify the part about collaboration, highlight the anecdotes. But do not acknowledge the silence. It will only feed speculation. Others whispered to photographers, positioning them for optimal angles, anticipating potential viral shots of Meghan's expression as the audience maintained its deliberate detachment. The energy backstage was frenetic yet disciplined, a high-wire act where every action, however small, had potential consequences for reputation, perception, and influence. Amid this controlled frenzy, subtle rivalries and unspoken tensions emerged. Certain staffers exchanged knowing glances, a reflection of personal histories intertwined with the broader narrative. Old grievances, industry politics, and professional competition played out silently, influencing decisions about camera angles, microphone levels, and timing cues. Even minor missteps, like an incorrectly positioned spotlight or a delayed camera pan, became potential points of conflict. The backstage environment was a powder keg of tension, teetering on the edge of chaos, yet carefully managed to avoid visible disruption. At one point, an unexpected issue arose. A VIP guest, seated near the stage, subtly gestured for attention. Security quickly intervened, escorting the individual discreetly to a side room. The incident was minor in terms of immediate impact, yet it underscored the unpredictability of live events. Even as every element was meticulously planned, human behavior remained a variable that no protocol could fully control. The moment also added another layer of anxiety for Meghan's team, who now had to ensure that the disruption didn't influence her performance or the audience's perception. Meanwhile, Meghan herself maintained a remarkable composure. Offstage, in quick whispers during brief pauses, she received updates from her team, adjusted posture, and prepared for the final segments of her speech. Her facial expressions revealed subtle tension, slight furrows, micro-smiles, controlled gestures, but no faltering in the delivery. She knew that every word, every pause, every breath was being observed, and she navigated the environment with the poise of someone intimately familiar with high-stakes public scrutiny. Backstage cameras captured additional dynamics that the audience could not see. A producer quietly muttering into a headset, social media strategists exchanging notes, assistants positioning microphones, and lighting technicians adjusting cues. The collective effort was immense, yet it highlighted a stark contrast between the calm appearance of Meghan on stage and the orchestrated chaos that enabled the performance. This backstage world, largely hidden from the public eye, was a microcosm of influence, power, and control operating behind the glittering veneer of the festival. At intervals, subtle commentary flowed from various corners. "She's holding it together, but can she maintain it?" whispered one PR agent. "The silence is strategic," observed a festival coordinator. "Every movement, every pause, it's a message." Others debated whether the audience's deliberate non-response was a critique, a power play, or merely an artifact of festival culture. The differing interpretations reflected the complexity of the environment, where perception, influence, and reality intertwined in intricate patterns. The tension reached its peak when a minor technical issue arose with one of the stage monitors. It flickered briefly, and a technician dashed forward attempting to restore clarity without disrupting Meghan's focus. The situation was resolved quickly, but in those seconds, the backstage chaos revealed the fragility of carefully constructed events. Even the smallest imperfection had the potential to ripple outward, affecting perception, narrative, and ultimately the story that the world would witness through media coverage. Social media updates, meanwhile, surged with speculation about the silence. Clips were shared rapidly, with hashtags like #SilentSundance and #MeghanIgnored trending worldwide. Analysts debated the meaning of the silence, scrutinized audience body language, and speculated on the broader implications for both Meghan's reputation and the festival's cultural narrative. The backstage team monitored every post, aware that the interpretation of these moments could shape global perception within minutes. And then came a private, startling revelation. A text from a high-profile attendee who had observed the scene closely. "It's not just silence," it read. "It's coordinated. Pay attention to row 5. Watch the subtle cues. They're sending a message. This single note, brief and cryptic, added another dimension to the backstage chaos. The awareness that the audience's behavior was not merely organic, but possibly orchestrated. The implications rippled quickly, forcing Meghan's team to reassess strategy, anticipate media framing, and prepare for an outcome far beyond the stage itself. By the time Meghan moved toward the final moments of her speech, the backstage environment had reached a fever pitch. Technicians, PR agents, security personnel, and strategists were operating in a synchronized flurry, each performing precise roles under intense pressure. Every camera angle, microphone level, and social media post was under scrutiny, creating a microcosm of controlled chaos that contrasted sharply with the composed, silent theater filled with industry heavyweights. And yet, for all this orchestrated effort, the underlying truth remained. The audience's deliberate silence was a force that could not be fully managed, predicted, or mitigated. Its presence dominated the room, influenced perception, and framed the narrative in ways that even the most skilled backstage teams could not completely control. Little did anyone backstage realize the subtle signals, the whispered exchanges, and the micro-gestures of both the audience and staff were about to converge into a series of moments that would define the festival and Meghan's appearance for years to come. By the time Meghan Markle's speech at Sundance 2026 concluded, or rather reached its midpoint, since the audience's silence had created an entirely different rhythm, the moment had already begun to escape the theater. Within minutes, clips began to surface. The first few were short, shaky videos shot from the theater balconies or front row seats. One, showing Meghan holding the microphone with a determined smile while the audience remained still, quickly went viral. Views surged in the thousands, then tens of thousands. Within the hour, posts were being shared across multiple platforms, each caption framing the silence differently. Meghan ignored at Sundance, the silent snub of 2026, Hollywood's cold shoulder to royalty. Some captions were neutral, others snide, and still others incredulous. The narrative was forming instantly, powered by the unique combination of silence, celebrity, and social media virality. Twitter, of course, exploded first. Hashtags like #SilentSundance, #MeghanIgnored, and #RoyalColdShoulder trended globally within minutes. Analysts dissected each frame, a flick of an eyebrow, a barely perceptible smirk, a whisper exchanged between attendees. These micro-moments became objects of speculation, conversation, and debate. Comments ranged from support for Meghan's composure to scathing criticism of the audience, with thousands weighing in. "She's magnificent in her calm," one post read. Another countered, if the audience didn't clap, maybe she deserved it. And in seconds, the silence had transcended its physical space, becoming a digital narrative that millions of people could interpret, amplify, and discuss. Instagram followed shortly after. Users posted clips of Meghan's gestures, slow-motion GIFs highlighting audience reactions, or non-reactions, and side-by-side comparisons with previous festival appearances. Memes appeared almost immediately, some mocking, some admiring, and some speculating wildly about the reasons for the audience's behavior. TikTok users, with their signature rapid edits and dramatic music overlays, created short viral clips titled "The Silent Snub at Sundance" and "Meghan versus Hollywood, the cold shoulder. Each platform added a layer of interpretation, creating a kaleidoscope of narratives around a single highly controlled public appearance. Media outlets scrambled to catch up. Online news sites posted screenshots, headlines, and analysis within minutes. Meghan Markle faces silence at Sundance became the top trending story in entertainment news, with accompanying GIFs showing her expressions in stark contrast to the unmoving audience. Journalists dissected the moment frame by frame, writing opinion pieces that speculated on everything from deliberate snubs to unspoken rivalries, from strategic optics to potential social politics behind the scenes. Even mainstream outlets, usually hesitant to overanalyze gestures, jumped on the story, amplifying its reach exponentially. The speed of social media coverage created a feedback loop that only intensified the moment. Fans and critics alike shared content, debated interpretations, and posted reactions in real time. Every post, comment, and share fed into the algorithm, ensuring that the story would reach audiences far beyond Sundance itself. Within hours, clips were circulating internationally, analyzed by fans in Europe, Asia, and Australia. The silent reactions of an elite audience in a Utah theater had become a global conversation, sparking debates about celebrity, influence, and power dynamics. Among the social media chatter, a few threads stood out. Analysts noticed the framing of the silence as intentional, almost performative. Clips were slowed down to highlight subtle gestures, a hand lightly touching a chin, a faint exhale, a slight nod barely perceptible to the untrained eye. Each of these moments became a symbol, evidence of a complex narrative that the audience was supposedly communicating without words. Some commentators described the silence as a masterclass in nonverbal communication, while others framed it as a coordinated display of elitism. Celebrities and influencers added their voices either in support or critique. Some praised Meghan for maintaining her composure in the face of an apparently indifferent audience. Others mocked the situation, suggesting that her presence alone had created tension or that the silence was a reflection of larger dynamics in Hollywood. The commentary was polarized yet unanimous in one sense. Everyone agreed the moment was extraordinary. It was a rare convergence of poised public presentation and deliberate audience detachment, amplified by the instantaneous reach of social media. Memes quickly proliferated, some humorous, some pointed, and others ironic. One depicted a zoomed-in audience member staring blankly, captioned, "When you expected applause but got silence instead." Another showed Meghan mid-gesture with the tagline, "Talking to Ghosts, Sundance Edition." Yet another created a comparison between her calm demeanor and the audience's blank expressions, implying a silent battle of wills. Each meme added another layer to the story, reinforcing the narrative of deliberate detachment and generating additional engagement across platforms. Even TikTok users known for their irreverent humor and viral creativity jumped on the moment. Clips were edited with dramatic music, slow motion effects, and text overlays highlighting audience expressions, or lack thereof. Users speculated on motives. Hollywood versus royalty, silent treatment masterclass, and when you hold the stage and no one reacts. The viral loop ensured that even people who had no prior interest in Sundance, Meghan, or indie films were now engaged, forming opinions based on highly curated snippets. Meanwhile, Meghan's team monitored the situation carefully, balancing urgency with restraint. Publicists analyzed trending hashtags, prepared statements, and coordinated with social media strategists to respond appropriately. The goal was to maintain narrative control without appearing reactive. Every moment of online conversation was scrutinized, which clips were gaining traction, which comments could be leveraged, and which interpretations needed to be countered or clarified. The speed of social media meant that missteps could be amplified instantly, while careful observation allowed the team to guide the conversation subtly, framing Meghan's composure as professionalism and resilience. But the online frenzy did more than just generate commentary. It shaped perceptions. Viewers who had not attended the festival were forming opinions based on a curated selection of clips, GIFs, and memes. Analysts observed that silence, once an inert absence, had transformed into a dynamic force in the digital narrative. It was debated as intentional, strategic, symbolic, and performative. The absence of applause became a statement in itself, a message amplified by millions of digital observers. The speed at which these reactions spread created cascading effects. Media outlets repurposed user-generated content, influencers framed discussions around narrative angles, and even late-night commentators incorporated clips into their monologues. Each iteration added another layer of analysis, sometimes contradicting previous interpretations, other times reinforcing them. The moment's virality was self-perpetuating, fueled by both human curiosity and algorithmic amplification. And yet, despite the intensity of the digital reaction, the most fascinating layer was the ambiguity. The audience's silence, once contained within a theater in Utah, now operated on a global stage. No one could say with certainty why the audience behaved the way it did. Was it personal? Political? Social? Professional? Perhaps all three. The mystery fueled engagement, driving shares, posts, and discussions across time zones and continents. This viral explosion also had a psychological effect on Meghan. While she remained composed on stage, the backstage team provided real-time updates on the online conversation. Her expressions, captured through subtle micro-movements, revealed a flicker of awareness, surprise at the speed of amplification, acknowledgement of global scrutiny, and determination to maintain poise. Every word she had spoken now carried additional weight, not only in the room, but across a digital landscape where millions would interpret, judge, and amplify her performance. As the hours passed, more complex narratives began to emerge.